All right. So I figured since I myself did not know this before I started down the forestry path, I would give you a bit of an overview about what is a registered professional forester anyway. So just a little bit of background about myself. Um, I am from Labrador, where there was no forestry sector, but I did grow up in the woods. So basically, from the time I was 3 weeks and older, my parents were putting me on the snowmobile and bringing me to the cabin on Michelle Lake, Labrador, that my grandfather built. He was a railway conductor, and he would throw off like a bit of wood at a time and just built this cabin in the middle of nowhere. And that's where I spent basically my entire childhood. However, I did uh, see them in the early 1990s, which you guys probably, it was before your time, but it made me have a pretty negative attitude towards the cutting of trees. So I used to give my dad a really hard time about cutting wood, even though our cabin was made out of wood and heated by wood. And so many other products that I used were made out of wood. But I just, I was really influenced by this popular media that, made an impression on me as a 8 or 9 year old at the time. So I kind of carried that on, and I gave my family a hard time about like trapping rabbits and hunting, even though, it was a sustainable thing that they were doing. But I just had a negative attitude about resource use for some reason. Fast forward, and here I am now, still in the woods, but making a living at it. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my path to get here. The only reason that I pursued forestry as a career was because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I finished high school. I was kind of floundering a little bit. I knew I wanted to do some kind of post-secondary education, and I was really lucky to do a transfer year at my local college, and where I could transfer all those credits into most programs first years. And I had a biology professor who saw that I had a keen interest in the outdoors, and I was interested in problem solving. And have you ever considered a career in forestry? And I said, what is that? And that was basically all it took. I started looking into it, and the University of New Brunswick forestry program was advertising a 95% post-graduation rate from their Bachelor of Science in Forestry program. And that's what hooked me. I was like, yes, I would like to be employed someday. So off I went, and that is the easiest way to become a forester. Go to an accredited program. There are several in Canada. UNB is one. There's one at UBC, Lakehead, and several others. But those are accredited by the Canadian board that regulates foresters. So that's the thing. It's a regulated profession, like nurses, doctors, etc. We have a code of conduct, scope of practice. We have to do annual learning, reporting. We pay dues every year to be registered professional foresters. And it's no joke. You're held accountable, and we're managing the forest in the public's interest. So there are a lot of rules to follow, but that's good, because that means that forests in Canada are well looked after. Something I wish I had known first, but you can always go backwards. There is a college program for forest technicians that you learn a lot of field skills for forestry. And if you did that first, you can transfer those credits into the university program, which is more like theory based. There is still a lot of field like labs and things, but I wish that I had known that, because I did feel like when I started working, I wasn't as confident in my field skills as some that had taken that route. Of course, there are other ways to become a forester, but they're quite long and require a lot of experience and some pretty intense mentoring, learning, and proving your skill set. So definitely the easiest way is to attend an accredited university program. So the role of registered professional foresters, like I said, we're responsible for looking after the public's interest. I'm going to talk about Ontario because that's the province that I've worked in and am familiar with, but a lot of this is transferable across Canada. I just can't speak specifically to other provinces. Like I said, we're regulated. You can be a generalist or a specialist, or both. I myself have kind of worked as a general forest practitioner, where I know a little about a lot of things and more about some things. There are some people who only work in research of a very specific thing or policy, or like any profession, you can really hone in on something specific, or you can be a generalist in managing forests. If you are out working in practical forest management, chances are you're a generalist because you have to learn something new basically every day. There's always things that are coming up out there. We are held accountable. Like I said, there's a complaints and discipline process. So if a member of the public has a problem with something that they see a forester doing out there, there is a process. They can file a complaint and every one of them is investigated. I spent 4 years on the council for the Ontario Professional Foresters Association, which was a really interesting experience. And I got to learn a lot about what happens behind the scenes and just how intense the regulation process is. Something to note is that because it's a regulated profession, it is required for most jobs to have a registered professional forester that involve the manipulation of forest cover. And that can mean a lot of things, including the development of forest management plans. So they all must be prepared and signed off and stamped. We have a stamp, mine's at my office, with a sign of approval by a registered professional forester. I did have a hard time getting my foot in the door when I first started. You're kind of expected during school to get a relevant job during the summer. My first forestry job was in Denver, Colorado, driving that giant truck all over the city, engaging in urban forest management activities. And I had only ever driven in a place with one traffic light up to that point. So it was very hot and very hard work and challenging. But after that, I was pretty much sure I could do anything I put my mind to. The next couple years, I headed up to Northern Ontario for a few summers, supervising tree plants and doing other field work. That was before the smartphone era, so there weren't very many pictures. After I got an internship with the Ministry of Natural Resources and then worked in Algonquin Park and for forest industry in Bancroft. Those jobs were mostly in the office, and I learned a lot of policy and about forest management in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence forest area. I also worked with the public a lot and learned a lot about teamwork and managing expectations of the public, which is a recurring thing in forestry that I will get to a little bit later. My current job is with the municipal government here in Renfrew County, and I'm the county forester. That means I manage the lands that are owned by the county for wood products, recreation, and wildlife. An average day on the job for me could include a lot of different things, and I will describe some of those to you in a little bit. So there's a wide range, but I do get to be outside quite a bit, and I get to bring my dog with me, which is fun. And yeah, basically, I can spend time looking for turtles in wetlands and then marking trees for harvest. Every day is different, and that's one of the things I like best about being a forester. So I'm just gonna zoom out a little bit and tell you a little bit about Ontario's forests. So about 66% of Ontario is covered in forests, and 91% of those forests are owned by the provincial government and a small portion by the federal government. I think that's incredible and pretty unique to Canada, that so much of the forest is owned by the provincial government is what it says here, but that means it's owned by taxpayers in Ontario. So if you live in Ontario, that's a lot of forest that you have a stake in. This graph here is something that I find really interesting. Don't try to read the font. I'll just explain to you what it means. There's a lot of people who are really concerned about old growth, which is definitely something that I care about as well. But something that I learned when I was writing a forest management plan is that, funny enough, it's often the young forest that's the limiting factor in our forests. So we have far more forest that is mature and old than we do that is young in Ontario, or in a lot of forest management areas in Ontario. So in the one that I wrote a forest management plan for, that was the case. And young forest is important to plenty of wildlife, plants, flora, fauna, everything. But we tend to care less about that because it doesn't give us that intrinsic value that old forests give us. And how do you create young forests? Well, fire, wind, storms, and harvesting. And that's what we aim to do in forestry, is to emulate natural disturbance and create that young forest condition. Because We spend a lot of money and effort trying to control wildfire to protect human values, but it would be occurring at a much higher rate than it is if there were no humans here. That's part of the forest management planning process, to look at what would the landscape look like if we weren't here. And those models will always show you that we have less young forests than we should. We also have less very old forests than we should, but that's something that we are taking action towards increasing because of the forest management practices that did exist in the late 1800s when European settlement started here. So 46% of the available volume in Ontario is harvested annually. That's very low. That's less than 0.5% of Ontario's forests are harvested every year. And that means that there's a lot of available volume out there that's not being utilized. Also, over 64 million trees are planted every year. And that's incredible, considering we talk about programs that are planting 50 or 2 trees at the federal level now, but that's happening pretty close, every 5 years in Ontario, which is pretty cool. And also it's really important to the economy. So 47,800 people were directly employed by forestry jobs in Ontario in 2020. And if you're interested in finding out about any of this, it's all readily available online. That is one thing that the government does a really great job of, is reporting about forestry in Ontario and in Canada. And the State of Canada's forest reports for 2020, I believe, or 2021, the most recent one just came out a couple weeks ago. So that has some really cool stats in it as well. I have included some about Canada later. So on Crown land, which is the provincially owned or public owned land in Ontario, it is required every 10 years to prepare a Crown forest management plan. And that has to be prepared by a registered professional forester and a multidisciplinary planning team. It has to follow all the acts, manuals, and guides produced by the province. And it's all about this three-legged stool, balancing the social, ecological, and economic objectives of the public and the province. Something that is truly remarkable is that we're forecasting forest conditions more than 150 years into the future. So we're not managing forests for today or tomorrow, it's for many generations from now. And basically the plan lays out what you can harvest, how you're going to get there, and what you need to do after. So even how many trees you're going to have to plant in that 10-year plan. There's a lot of public and Aboriginal consultation and involvement. And I myself wrote a forest management plan. It took 2.5 years of my life and was over 1,000 pages. So I can attest that it is a very intensive process. And there was no stone left unturned when you're preparing a forest management plan. And this is another thing, that you can see everything online. So if you live in any of these areas, all you have to do is Google forest management plans in Ontario, and you can literally read the plan that was prepared for your area or any area you're interested in, even Algonquin Park. So why are we doing all this? Why are we spending 2.5 years every 10 years to write a forest management plan? Well, it's all laid out in the Crown Forest Sustainability Act. So that act the purpose is to provide for the sustainability of Crown forests, and in accordance with that objective, to manage Crown forests to meet that three-legged stool I talked about for present and future generations. And that was prepared in 1994 and has been the law ever since. So it was like the basis for modern day forestry. It really was a game changer and made it more than about managing timber. Ever since then, even science continually improves the way we manage forests, but those principles of sustainability remain the same. Guides are continually updated with new science, and we change the way that we protect forest values as new science arises. Sometimes the protection becomes less, sometimes it becomes more, and it all depends on what the research is telling us. So there's a whole suite of guides and manuals that tell us how to prepare these forest management plans. And all harvest areas are required to be regenerated through planting or natural means. And I think that is the most important thing to note, is that you don't just cut a forest and walk away. You're legally required to make sure that it's growing back. So we're zooming in on a smaller scale now for what I do. So I work on municipal land. So just a tiny area compared to what I worked on before, but I do all of it myself. So it's about 6,500 acres. Sorry, that's supposed to be hectares, on 53 different tracts scattered throughout Renfrew County. The first property was acquired in 1951, and most of the property purchases were made in the 60s. The reason that they were purchased is because there was a grant program that provided funding through the Agreement Forest program that the province had on at that time. 75% of the purchase price could be refunded if the land was declared better suited for forestry purposes, unsuitable for agriculture. And the reason that is because erosion and desertification was happening in southern Ontario as a result of settlement, land clearing, and failed farming. So a really smart guy, Edmund Zavitz, had this idea, like, we need to be planting trees in these areas. And that's how what is now known as community forests started. And that's what I work in, the community forests. And there are 57 of those in Ontario. So you see a lot of old heritage remains in these little forests. So I find old cars, often stone fences, abandoned buildings. You just never know what you're going to find out there. So what's a day in the life of like for me? Well, I spend about 40% of my time outside, 60% inside. I do write and implement the forest management plan, but it is much less intense than the Crown Forest Management Plan that I wrote for a much larger area. It can actually be fun, and I write it for the public to be able to read and interpret with lots of pictures. I'm also responsible for building, updating, and maintaining our forest inventory, and that's what I was doing just yesterday. I was out collecting data in the woods. I write the forest operation prescriptions if we're going to do a harvest and make maps associated with those. Often I will do the marking of trees myself. So every tree that is to be harvested either gets marked with orange paint, or if they don't have to be marked with orange paint, they get marked with blue paint to retain for wildlife purposes. Also, like I said, I spend time out looking for values like turtles and cultural heritage and determining how best to protect them. In that picture, that is a Blandings turtle selfie that I had my lunch with one day, and that's a species at risk. So happening across that turtle means that I'm placing timing restrictions on that area if we were ever going to do any work there, so that no equipment can be in during the active turtle season. I also would prepare or lay out the boundaries adjacent to private property to make sure that we're not trespassing. Prepare and issue any harvest tenders or other work that needs to be done for silvicultural purposes. And then send the bill for the actual volume harvested if we are harvesting timber, and planning that follow-up silviculture, which means the regeneration of forests. Some other cool stuff I get to do is education and outreach. So being here and being able to talk to you is actually part of my job, because we like to tell the good story of forestry in Renfrew County. Also, I work with the local forest industry because more than 6,000 people are employed by forestry where I live. So it's important to the municipal government here and a lot of people that are living in our communities. I do spend quite a bit of time reviewing policy and providing feedback to different levels of government, and liaising with the local industry to address any concerns they might have with those policies. Also, sometimes I see a news article that is definitely in the fake news category about forestry that I cannot refrain from writing a response to. So luckily, I do get the opportunity to respond to that kind of stuff as part of my job. Something that has become a huge part of my job that I did not expect is dealing with forest health. And that's both hands-on and responding to inquiries. So invasive species are the hot topic of my career. I did not learn about this at school at all. It's really something that's come into play in the last 10 years for sure. It's a very hard time to be a tree right now. There's a lot of diseases and pests that have come to this area that were not here 10 years ago. In these pictures, I have beech bark disease, which is killing all of the beautiful beech trees here. Garlic mustard, which is an invasive plant that chokes out natural understory growth in forests. So every year I go and pull it by hand in an area that's next to a species at risk plant. Also emerald ash in here. So I've been setting these sticky traps for about 5 years to monitor for the presence of those. I give up on the trapping because it is everywhere here now. And last year I got to help with the release of some parasitic wasps to control emerald ash borer as part of a federal research trial that's going on. I hope that that comes to fruition because we really need something to help save the ash trees that are getting taken out by this insect. So as a result of this work and knowledge that I've been acquiring, I get a lot of random inquiries from the public. We're in the middle of a now known as spongy moth outbreak, which people are upset about, even though it doesn't kill trees. But that just gives you an idea of like when something affects the public, that's when they want to talk about it. Basically, on the forest health front, it's one of those things that it's constant learning. Everything is always changing. It's important to communicate with your network and keep up to date on what's going on so that you can answer those questions and do the best thing for the forest. So why do I love forestry? Well, for something that I didn't know what it was when I started, I definitely can say that I do love forestry. Every day is different. There's always a new challenge. Every day I'm in the woods, I see something that I'm like, wow, this is so cool. I have to take a picture, including my new dog, Charlie, who's, definitely posing for all the photos these days. You get the opportunity to be creative and solve problems. So, not one forest is like another. So every time it's like, I honestly feel like forestry is as much art as it is science. And it's really cool to see that before, during, and after of the small scale management that I'm doing right now. I love the mix of outdoor and indoor work. It was really raining today, so I did not work in the woods, but on the nice days, I'm happy to be outside. I get to live in a rural community, which is important to me. I'm not really a city person, so this is like the best case scenario for my career. I do feel like I have a good work-life balance. There are definitely forestry jobs that you could have that would be a lot more stressful than mine. Able to maintain a good balance, and my work most often stays at work. And like I said, the thing that hooked me, the 95% employment rate, I have been employed since the day I graduated from UNB, and I've had a lot of different jobs, and that's been by choice to try different things. And I'm definitely happy that I made the choice I did. What are some other reasons that I love forestry? Well, the people are great. This is the number one answer that I would give if asked that question. All of the loggers that I've encountered, all of the people who have taken me under their wing to teach me as a newcomer to the field, all of the peers that I've been able to meet, I'm really connected to the folks that work in the forest, and I'm happy to share their story. And I think that's one of the things that I like to spend my free time even doing, is sharing those positive stories on social media that people wouldn't see otherwise. Some examples of those. So these are just some of the loggers that I work with. They would, a lot of them, I'm the first woman that they've ever encountered in the field, but they have been really amazing. Everyone I've met, they're happy to tell me when they've gone above and beyond, and it's really cool to see that pride in their work. So just a couple examples. These guys found a wolf den. They stopped working in the area, told me about it, and wanted to know what they could do to make sure that that was being protected. They also saw a little songbird and wanted to know how they could protect that nest from predation because it was along a road. Like the bird built the nest like right next to the road that was already there, and they were worried that it was going to get eaten by something and wanted to protect it. I'm like, that's really cool. I mean, like, people don't know that about loggers. Steve in the middle and his son, they took so much extra time to protect the natural regeneration that was under a forest that they were thinning. I mean, they couldn't see where they were going. I was really hung up on protecting the sugar maple regeneration under a red pine forest. So they took their time and it looked amazing. This big machine traveling through the woods. You could barely tell they were there when they were done. And then another guy, Mike, a painted turtle was like traveling across the forest and he saw it from really far away, stopped his equipment, got out and helped the turtle in its direction of travel towards the wetland that it was going towards, just so, to make sure that it was extra protected. And I was like, wow, the fact that you're telling me this is extremely cool, but I love that these are the kinds of decisions that are being made out there. One of the other reasons I love forestry is because it makes me feel really good to work for a sector that is keeping forests as forests. And this is one of the things that really bugs me is when I see news articles that say deforestation in Canada is leading the world. And it's like people associate that with forestry, and forestry does not equal deforestation. Deforestation is a permanent change from forest to another use, like making a parking lot or a farm field or a subdivision. And like I said, all forests that are harvested in Canada on public land are required by law to be regenerated. So in fact, let's just look at these numbers here for a second. 0.2% of Canada's forests were harvested in 2019. 0.2%. 4% were affected by insect infestation, and 0.01% were deforested. And that means changed from forest to something else. So cities expanding, Walmart's being built, farm fields being plowed, that kind of thing. So what do you think are the top causes of deforestation? Agriculture, urban development, and natural resource extraction, excluding forestry. So like mining, things like that. I think that if I could get one message out about forestry in the world, that would be it, is that it does not equal deforestation. 77% of Canada's managed forests is not only managed to the level of the law, but it's certified to a third-party standard of sustainable forest management, which means it gets audited by an impartial company like the SFI or FSC are the two things you might see on the back of your junk mail. That means that it's come from a sustainably managed forest. So they do not have a stake in the forest, and they're coming to make sure that everything you're doing is according to plan. And like I said, the big point, all forests harvested on public land must be regenerated. And we saw that 91% of Ontario is owned by the public. Over 90% of Canada's forest is also publicly owned. Something else I love about forestry is that the face of forestry is changing. There is a stereotype that a forestry worker is a big, burly, lumberjack looking man. When I started, there were not many other women. So as a result, myself and my friend Jessica Kaknavicius in the photo, we actually met because we were the only two women at a conference. And we were like, I guess we should be friends. So we started a network for women in the forestry sector, and it's grown since 2015 to about 2,600 women all over the world. We started with just 20 women we knew in a private Facebook group, and it's just grown. The benefits are that women are feeling empowered by seeing that women are doing these jobs all over. They're seeking advice and they're meeting like-minded women in the sector and supporting each other. So it's been really cool to see that grow. As of 2016, which unfortunately are the latest stats, only 17% of the forest sector was made up of women. I do think that's increased. I'm seeing a lot more women out there now, and I am looking forward to when there is updated data available. Some things that I learned early on is that you might have to move, you might have to do something unglamorous, you will have to work incredibly hard. It always pays to do more than is expected of you. People are willing to go to bat for a keener. And once you have proved yourself at one job and have a good advocate for your career, they will definitely help you along it always is good to get outside your box and push yourself beyond your comfort zone. And one opportunity leads to another. So it's never a bad thing to say yes. And just a quick story about that is that when I was, not in this job very long, a local filmmaker was making a video about women in the forestry sector. And I was like, oh, I hate being on camera, but okay, I guess we don't have much to choose from around here. So be in your video, 30 seconds or so. A couple years later, I got a LinkedIn message from a company in Sweden asking if I would consider hosting a web series about heavy equipment engines. My first instinct was, no, this sounds like a scam. But I said yes. And since then, we have made 11 episodes all over the world. And I've had some really cool experiences. So something that made me really uncomfortable worked out pretty well. I just got back from the Arctic Circle for a new episode. So my question to you to think about as we go into the Q&A is, are you hoping for solutions that will help mitigate climate change, protect forests, and create a greener planet? And my response to you, if you are thinking about that, is that you can do that yourself by becoming a forester, because I do feel like that is what my day-to-day job is. So thanks for listening, and I would be happy to have any questions you have right now.